Good day to everyone. The Honorable Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, the Honorable Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable My Lord Chief Justice of Trinidad and Tobago, Justice Ivo Archie, O.R.T.T., and Mrs. Rodriguez Archie, Her Excellency, Mrs. Rima Kimona, the Honorable Mr. Edmund Dillon, Major General, retired Minister of National Security, Brigadier General Rodney Smart, Chief of Defense Staff, and Mrs. Smart, Mr. Harold Phillip, Acting Commissioner of Police, Ms. Cecil Duke, Commissioner of Prisons, Acting, Mr. Roosevelt Bruce, Chief Fire Officer, Acting, His Worship Alderman Karen Valentine, Mayor of the City of Port of Spain, senior government officials and heads of department, members of the Executive First Division Officer and retired members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, all other specially invited guests, and of course a very special hail up to, in fact, a former Assistant Commissioner of Police and now, in fact, a Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of National Security, all other specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I have to admit that I feel very comfortable in the presence of the police. I recall, in fact, a former DPP saying that he was doing what was required because anytime police come and knock on his door, and I'm referring to Mr. Aldrich Benjamin, deceased, and knock on the door and you open the door at midnight, you say, fellas, I ain't lineman tonight. The thing about it is this, is that having worked with police officers for some 20 years of my life, and having been in love and having been involved in the criminal justice system. Yes, I'm in love with my wife. And being in the criminal justice system for some 20 years, I have had to interact with police officers all my life. And I have to admit, sometimes when I see the blows coming your way, some of you all who, for example, who I know personally, who in fact have been my investigators, those persons who in fact were responsible for solving crimes, resulting in very high conviction rates many, many years ago. I feel hurt because, again, we are kind of people, we have a very short memory. We don't appreciate what we have generally sometimes, and sometimes, in fact, we simply forget. And I want to tell you all, in fact, that a large portion of the police executive today are persons that I know personally who have, in fact, been in the trenches with me when we were working all over Trinidad and Tobago with all the bad roads then and getting the job done. And I personally feel that as much as in fact sometimes perceptively we are not getting the results in terms of solving of crimes, because that's the big talk, solving crimes. And not much is being said about preventing crimes. Because I know personally that many of the police officers are involved in community projects, community policing. In fact, it was through their assistance that I was able to organize some 30 or 40 young people from Faizabad, Palo Seco, Las Bajos, Siparia, Oropouche, to come up this morning, wake them up at 4 in the morning, and they came up to see the parade because those children, in fact, only saw the parade on television. and never in real terms. So I know what the police is doing. I know, in fact, for example, about the community policing, the youth groups that you have formulated. I know personally when, in fact, I initiated the Bail Boys project, you took persons into the system, criminals, and you shaped them into being law-abiding citizens to the point where I convinced them that the crime you committed, you will most likely have to serve time. But you're a different person and a different man. And when you come out, you can be a greater and better person. Now, this is not to say that we do not have challenges. Much has been said about the amount of money going into the police service. And this is where, for example, sometimes I'm just wondering if maybe we need to consider, possibly moving our focus or changing our focus from one of incarceration, from one of lockup, of solving crimes, basically to one of restorative justice, to one of mediation. Because I could tell you all my life, I have met hardcore criminals. I have met diabolical men and women. I know of one man right now out there who is so good at killing that he has 24 notches on his gun. And all we have been able to arrest him for is possession of a firearm. And he's not the only one. Because as the chief will tell you, we read files as judges. And we will read 10 files and we realize the relationship and the connections among those files and one person. And because that person is so good at what he does, we are only able to, in fact, zone in on an offense not as aggravated as murder. It's not easy. It's not easy as a judge to know that there is, in fact, a cold-blooded killer walking out of court because the victim, the witness, has been murdered, or because, in fact, the case has collapsed. It's not easy as a prosecutor to know that, in fact, that particular person looking at you is a cold-blooded killer, and we just don't have enough evidence. And this is where, for example, as police officers, I feel we need to sometimes engage the traditional sleuth approach. If it looks suspicious, it is suspicious. If there is something odd, it is odd. And in that way, I feel that as much as we have technology, we need to observe, we need to listen. We need to travel in maxi taxis 24/7. We need to even go down to Kentucky Fried Chicken, South Key, the place that sells the most Kentucky Fried Chicken in the world per capita, and sit there. You know why? Because many files I have read, when the killers and the robbers and the rapists do their dastardly deed, they either eat at Kentucky Fried Chicken or they go down there after. What I'm saying is that we need to be innovative in terms of how we approach crime and how we solve crime. As I said, sometimes, in fact, many of our officers engage in real sacrifice, and only a little while ago, I remembered, in fact, having read a police officer was the first person to raise our flag back in 1962 because the Coast Guard man who was supposed to do the job fell ill. You know, and he raised it. So I remember, in fact, for example, Ms. Phillips. Ms. Phillips is Assistant Commissioner of Police. But because of her support systems, she wouldn't let you know that her husband was Asford Joseph. And Ashford Joseph was a blind musician in Superior who trained hundreds and hundreds of musicians, including Mr. Shack, including Marshall Montano, including Nappy, Farmer Nappy, and even, in fact, coached my wife to play the guitar. And she supported him in his endeavors. And he changed lives in that part of the country. So what I want to tell you all here is that we all can make a difference in the lives of those we encounter. I can tell you I continue to have deep respect for police officers. Because you know what? You know how hard it is? You're in homicide, and every day you're picking up bodies, and there's nothing in place to say, tell me about your hurt and your pain. Is this demoralizing you? Is this mashing up your morale? Is this changing you as a person? And we need to engage the person and the human aspect in terms of how we treat our police officers. I am happy to relate that as a judge, for years I spoke about the need for $1 million insurance for police officers when they die in the line of duty. I also spoke about, in fact, the wife being paid a monthly salary for the next 2 years after his death so she can catch herself. I also spoke about, in fact, supporting the children until the age of 18 and also giving a child dependency if they decide to go to university. Because when you lose your father, you lose your rudder. Man, you might even lose the ship. And the state has a responsibility when someone dies in the line of duty to take care of the family of, in fact, that particular person. But gentlemen, persevere. I know it's not easy getting the blows on social media. I know it's not easy, in fact, bearing the criticism. I know there is a goodness in your heart that you want to get the job done. But persevere, you must. And I'm sure, in fact, the Minister of National Security, he and all too, I see his pain and anguish when they come at him. And he means well. He wants well to be done. But we have a philosophy in Trinidad and Tobago. We love the finished product. We're not interested in the road to success. Give me it immediately. Now, instanta. I am hopeful that with the pronouncement that the Honorable Prime Minister will be meeting with the opposition leader on Friday, we are all hoping that initiatives, we are all hoping that policy, in fact, would be engaged in a way to deal with the issue of crime in this country. As I told Jinping, President Jinping, when in fact I spoke to him at the CARICOM meeting some years ago, when he was going to meet President Obama, I addressed him directly in the midst of many prime ministers. I said, when in fact great people meet, when you meet Obama, great things must happen. In other words, it must not be a talk shop. It must not be brinksmanship. It must not be footworks. We, in fact, have to get the job done because crime is no longer political. And I invoke the power of God that he will inspire the Prime Minister, he will inspire the opposition leader, that they can in fact get together and come up with ideas and policies and initiatives that have nothing to do with politics, but about country. So that in fact that all of us here can live life with the required peace, with the required harmony, with the required unity. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed my pleasure, in the midst of great men and women, former commissioners of police like Mr. Snacks, who I'm seeing in fact a member of the Police Service Commission, and many more retired police officers. We need to band together. As a nation, we need to be unified in terms of our approach, in terms of how we solve the problems. And we have problems. The Honorable Prime Minister has stated we have problems, and we have problems. But we need to get together to solve those problems. And any problem we have in Trinidad and Tobago is salvageable. It is salvageable. There are solutions to problems. But we need to always engage the maturity, the intellect, to get the job done. So it gives me great pleasure to in fact raise this toast in salute to a great nation, because we are a great nation. Make no bones about it. I have lived abroad, I have lived internationally, I've worked internationally, and I can tell you, we are viewed in a very affirmative way for our competencies, for our capacities, and for getting the job done. You know, for example, I have friends in Oman, in Qatar, in Bahrain. And you know when, for example, they see Trinidadians work there, you know what they say? You have any more like you to come across? So we can get the job done. And we must get the job done. So ladies and gentlemen, we toast to a great nation, a great republic, with the best anthem in the world. Yeah.